Good afternoon, everyone. We are so excited for our episode today. We have the amazing, the wonderful Karen Dyson with us on Intentionally Act Live. So, welcome. And let me tell you a little bit about Karen and how wonderful she is. And then we're going to jump right in because there is a lot to cover. And we have 1 hour to cover a lot of information. That said, here we go. Karen Dyson is a global grooming process and engineering vice president. I'm going to say that one more time because that's a lot. Here we go. A global, worldwide, global grooming process and engineering president at Procter and Gamble. Now, Procter and Gamble is a part of the larger Gillette umbrella, and they're headquartered in South Boston, which is where All Aces is based. And I am so grateful that she is here with us. She has an amazing educational background. She has done amazing work within Gillette under the as the leader, a leader within Procter and Gamble. We're going to go deeper into that. Everything from efforts around supporting women in the workplace to people with African ancestry. We're going to talk a bit more about that. We're also going to take a deeper dive into the amazing woman that she is and how she got here in her journey. So the last thing I'm going to say before I have her introduce herself and tell us how she's doing today as part of Collective Care, for those of us who are used to watching. I met Karen as part of the Massachusetts Business Roundtable. Shout out to JD, who runs the organization, and his team. And immediately I was taken aback by her energy, her positivity, the charisma. I mean, I can tell that, even though we met through the virtual kind of Zoom world, I could tell that when she walks into a room, everybody notices. And her energy is infectious. And I was so drawn to her, and we have since spent time together and getting to know one another. And I'm just really grateful that she accepted our invitation today. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming the wonderful Karen Dyson.
Thank you so much, Atyia. You are so kind. I just really first appreciate you having me on today. I think you and I share the same passion. And so I'm just really excited to be here with you. So, in terms of my check in, how am I doing? I'm doing really good. I'm actually on vacation in Hawaii. And so, you know that there is no big complaints when you're in a place as beautiful as this. But I could not miss the opportunity to connect with you. I don't consider this work at all. This is something I'm very passionate about. And so, just really thrilled to have the opportunity. I do have to say that uh, there is something that's heavy on my heart. I am a global leader, and I have a lot of individuals who are in my organization that are Asian. And you know very well that some of the things that they're navigating through in terms of hate, and that really resonates with me. This is something that, as an African ancestry woman, that I've had to navigate myself. And over the past year, we dealt with a lot of that within our own community. And so my heart really is really connecting to that community and looking for opportunities for Black people to really be allies to our Asian community as they're wrestling with some of the same things that we've had to wrestle with for generations.
Thank you for creating the space and making the time for us to acknowledge the shared struggle of the ways that racism is impacting all of us, especially our Asian brothers and sisters right now in this moment, mainly because a lot of the ideas, right, that have been perpetuated about, their affiliation with COVID-19 and all types of silliness that we know, even though it's silliness, you repeat some things enough and it starts to infect us and influence our behavior. And so some of us are acting on this flawed thinking, flawed logic. So thank you for bringing that up. I also want to give a shout out to all of the love that Karen is getting on social media, especially Facebook. So we have Jeffrey Michael, who says, "So awesome. Go, Karen, my sister. You are an inspiration to all of us." We also have, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name. You'll hold me accountable. So I think it's pronounced Ladafrica Kessler. Yes, you look beautiful, Karen. Maisha Gray Diggs says, "I see you, Sister Karen Langham Dyson." You have Ratina Carter, who says, "Hi, Karen." And we also have Cicely Ingram, who says, "Thank you for always walking in excellence and championing so courageously." So already the love is flowing in, which is a reflection of how you show up in other spaces. So that said, I'm going to get us started right in with your journey, because part of Intentionally Act Live is really about understanding what's happening in workplaces and different strategies that folks are using, and as well as who people are and how they've had to navigate their own journey along the way, right? Which is not always something that we talk about in the same breath when it comes to workplace and DEI efforts and things like that. So I just want to begin with, what made you fall in love with what you do, in whatever ways you want to start us off?
Well, before we go there, I do want to talk about my journey because I do believe that I am who I am because of my life experiences and how I was socialized. And it didn't begin at P&G. It really
Mhm.
began back in Mobile, Alabama, where I'm from. Both of my parents were raised very poor on farms, and they were educated. They got their undergraduate degrees and their master's degrees from HBCUs.
Mhm.
And my parents are in their mid to late 80s. That was pretty significant for Black people back then. And my parents also grew up in the deep South during the civil rights movement, right? And
Mhm.
so that all shaped who I am because having parents, number one, who put a lot of emphasis on education, and
Mhm.
having parents who really lived through some of those tough periods where Blacks weren't allowed to drink in certain water fountains, or they couldn't ride the bus, in certain areas. That really impacted kind of my understanding of where my place is
Mhm.
in America and what I needed to do to ensure where it should be. And so, if I fast forward to me uh, attending Tuskegee University, I'll tell you, Atyia, when I went to Tuskegee University and decided to major in engineering, I had never met a Black engineer before.
So
And
why did you choose it?
because my parents were guidance counselors and they said, Karen, you're
Mm.
good in math. This would be a great opportunity. You're always asking questions. You're curious. You should consider engineering. And I
Mm.
went there based on what how my parents guided me. And I said, yeah, I think, I like math. I can do this for sure. But I didn't think about that, Atyia, until literally until after I started working. And I realized I had never met a Black engineer. I never met an engineer,
Mm.
but I never met a Black engineer. And you know how important it is to have those role models in front of you, to see someone who looks like you, to confirm, right? But yes, if they did it, I can do it. And I can recall um, some of the students who had graduated who would come back to Tuskegee, and they were engineers now, and the pride that I had. And it really did confirm, if they did this, yes, I can do it too. And
Mm.
I think so often we take that for granted. Even today, we have first generational Black students. Their parents can only get them there. They don't
Mhm.
even have the means for giving them all of the things that they need to really thrive,
Right.
right? And
Mhm.
I see this. I'm very active in recruiting. I lead our recruiting team at Procter and Gamble for Tuskegee University, and I see it when I go back in the students, and I see me,
Mm.
right? My parents were able to get me there and support me better, but I see students who are just that first generation, and their families are really depending on them to be able to break that circle of that cycle of poverty,
Mm.
and they're the hope for a whole generation. And so as I moved into, I started with P&G. I became the only one, right? And I was the only woman because in a technical field there weren't many women in a lot of cases. I
Mhm.
was the only Black in many cases, and I had to adapt. I had to adapt to coming into an environment and being comfortable being the only one and really understanding my role. Very early, I realized that my position, my work, where I am was bigger than me.
Mm.
And I say that because a lot of younger people, younger engineers, younger Black people were coming behind me. They were looking to see how I did, right? And to confirm or to affirm whether or not they could too.
Mm.
And still today, I see that and I accept that. I accept that as just a part of who I am and what the opportunities are for those that are coming behind me.
Thank you for that grounding in your journey and your kind of how you grew up and the how you got to where you are and the some of the values and principles around it. And there's a couple of things that you mentioned that I just want to pull out for our audience members. So number one, you talked about your place in America, and I want to come back to that to kind of that as you were growing up, part of the challenge was figuring that out. And so I want to unpack a little bit what that means. The other thing is when you talked about the lack of examples of Black people who are engineers. And we see this in a lot of fields, right? There we have an underrepresentation across a number of fields, in engineering being one of them. And so it leads to this idea that most people have heard of, but sometimes we forget in practice, which is the imposter experience. Some people have heard it as the imposter syndrome, and it's this idea that because we don't see other people who look like us or who are like us in certain spaces, it can undermine some of our efforts because it means that it's harder for us to see ourselves being successful in that field. And so we will be questioned from the outside world, and we will also be questioning ourselves from the inside out. And so being able to kind of normalize that that's an experience we have as part of underestimated groups or marginalized groups. And then the last thing is this idea of this not just being about you, right? This idea of interdependence, that the more we're able to see how we're connected to one another within our groups, outside of our groups, that it helps us reframe what the priorities are. Excuse me. It helps us to better connect with one another and not only see the world through our own lens and through our own needs and wants. And so I just wanted to connect those dots because I think they're so powerful
Yeah.
in the work. And so I want to come back to this idea of my place in America. In the context was when you were telling your story, you said, growing up, trying to figure out what my place was in America. And can you just talk a little bit more about that part of your journey?
Absolutely. I think I didn't wake up one day and say, oh, this is where I belong. It
Mm-hmm.
has been kind of an evolution of my life, but I have such clarity
Mm-hmm.
on what my place is. And my place to me simply is I must move forward and I must pull forward. So I must continue to push myself to move as far as I can because those individuals are looking to see what's possible for them. And
Mm-hmm.
in the process, I must pull forward those that I can with the position that I have. And so for me, as I think about America and we're catching up, right? I look back at my parents and how they had to pull themselves out of a life of poverty as farmers, and that was their purpose. They got to that point of where they were to be able to give their kids a better life. And so for me, I have to take it from that point, and not only for myself. And that's where I think a lot do for themselves and they forget about the others, right? So it's important for me to be able to push myself as far as I can, but not forget about the others and make sure that I'm leveraging my position, whether I'm developing and coaching and inspiring, or whether I'm using my position to be able to help position them for progression as well. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not just about progression in terms of work or corporate America, it's progression in terms of life, in terms of your mindset, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, this is how I really align with what my role is in
Mm.
America.
It's funny what you said. I'm going to cheat a little bit because I had to pull up um, where my what you made me think of, and so the Arizona Federation of Colored Women's Clubs, and we had the Black suffragist Mary Church Terrell, who said who created this tagline for the Black woman of that women's club, um, lifting as we climb.
Hmm.
Lifting
Absolutely.
as we climb. And so that's the immediate thought that popped in my head when you said that. So thank you for sharing that and jogging my memory of that experience, or that the part of our history. So one thing, another place I wanted to go is to talk a little bit more about your involvement with Tuskegee. So you're at Procter and Gamble under the umbrella of Gillette, and you're trying to kind of lean into your purpose and your mission while you're in this corporate space. And so tell us a little bit more about some of the work you've been doing in that space.
Well, I've had a deep connection with Tuskegee University all of my life because my mother is from Tuskegee University, Tuskegee,
Mhm.
Alabama, and she attended Tuskegee University. And if you know the history of Tuskegee University, it was really founded around being able to develop the skills of poor Black people so that they could provide for themselves. And we have a famous statue on the campus called Lifting the Veil of Ignorance. And that resonates because Tuskegee was about educating so that you're lifting that veil of ignorance. But if you think about the work that I am so passionate about, I'm trying to lift the veil of ignorance to eliminate racism.
Mhm.
And a lot of racism, a lot of hate is rooted in ignorance. And the more we can unmute people so that they're telling the stories. So I want Black people to tell their stories, and I
Mhm.
want non-Black people to also unmute and be able to talk about why this is so important for us to be able to create a culture and an environment. And so the work that I do with Tuskegee now is multiple facets. We have a very engaged recruiting team at P&G where we go back and we look for top Black talent. It's a historically Black university, and we look for top Black talent to bring back. This year, we have recruited over 35 Black students who will be joining us as interns and full-time hires, and that's the future. And
Mhm.
we not only just go and recruit, we go back and we have a P&G leadership conference where we're training them on some of those skills that you don't get. I didn't come from a corporate family. And I had to really connect with Black people to give me the insights that you would normally pick up if you grew up in a corporate family. So
Mhm.
we try to do that, and I make myself available. If you need help, if you need coaching, if you need advice, even if it's not related to P&G, I open myself up to support these students because I know they don't necessarily have families that they can call and get this type of corporate coaching from.
Mhm.
Because again, Atyia, remember, I was one of those students, so I know what they may be missing, right?
Mhm.
And this all becomes really important in terms of really trying to help develop the whole student so that when they move into corporate America, they hit the ground running and they're not losing time trying to compensate for what they didn't get as they were socialized.
Mm-hmm.
And then after we get those students at P&G, we have a very robust program for mentoring and coaching them so that we can ensure that they get off to a good start and that they are successful.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think, I want to celebrate what you started with, which is recruiting over 30, I think you said over 35
35.
Black interns and
Well,
employees, full-time
mhm.
employees. So, and there's a level of intentionality that you are modeling for our audience in terms of you didn't sit around and wait for them to come to you. You invested energy and time into building the relationships to leverage your existing relationships, and to put the effort into actually doing that proactive recruiting. So
Absolutely.
I just want to explicitly call that out and say thank you for all that you're doing and congratulations.
Thank you.
The other piece is you mentioned something that is really powerful. Everything you're saying is powerful. And I want to affirm a lot of what you're saying. And the way I'm going to do that is I am going to acknowledge that there are many folks who are affirming everything you're saying on social media.
Oh, thank you.
So we have Jeffrey Michael Kent, who wanted to clarify that the Jeffrey Michael I mentioned earlier is Jeffrey Michael Kent. And also is acknowledging that this isn't just about ourselves, right? That this journey really is about that interdependence, how we are connected to each other, how we help and support each other. And it's aligned with All ACEs, one of our values that's called collective care, right? It's not just about taking care of ourselves. That we actually live in an environment where the organizations we're a part of need to help create the space for us to take care of ourselves, and we need to create the space to take care of ourselves and each other, right? And then that is foundationally important. So thank you for that. The other thing that was lifted up was allies unmuting being a powerful concept. And so I want to make sure that I'm highlighting that because as we think about all of our work collectively that needs to happen to confront racism and advance racial
Yeah.
equity and bring social justice into the different spaces that we're in, it's part of this is about owning our power. And
Hey, Atyia,
all,
I like to pause there and talk a little bit if you're
yeah,
okay.
let's go.
Yeah, that I'll have to tell you in this past year has been one of the things that has been breakthrough for
Mm,
me on this journey. And I have to talk specifically about the work that we've done at our Gillette site.
mm,
During this past year, we experienced significant racial unrest. And I have to tell you, it was the most heartbreaking experience that I have ever had, as I consider myself to be the mother of the AAs, the Black people in Boston. And for
and
me to
I'm going to do a quick acronym check. So for those who are watching, AAs are African
African
ancestry.
African ancestry, yes, and it for me hearing them have the not just frustration but the heartbreak
Mhm,
of the moment, the experience with
mm,
George Floyd and being murdered and Breonna Taylor. I can't tell you how helpless I felt in terms of how do I protect them from this?
mm,
Especially some of the younger ones who were frankly socialized differently than we were, right? And what it really kicked off was a opportunity for our total organization to get involved. And we established what are called our AA champions, which are the same as allies, but we were very intentional about not just having allies. We needed people who were going to really be champions for us. And it's typically when you think of allies, there are, an individual that I'm an ally. But our organization said, hey, we want to do more than just say have individuals be allies or champions. We want to create a network.
Mm-hmm.
And we recognize that it's no longer acceptable for Black people to have to fight this fight on their own. And so our people were tired, they were exhausted, some were scared, right? And out of this champions network that was established, we had our non-Black colleagues standing with us, but more importantly, standing for us. And
Mm-hmm.
this whole Unmute campaign was born out of that champions network. And they were challenging everyone, more specifically, non Blacks, to go off of mute, to unmute. And if you
Mm-hmm.
think about it's a very simple message that really unifies our relatable shared experiences of working from home to a broader metaphor of the anti-racist movement,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so this has become so powerful in our organization when we're having not the Black people say, we need you to speak up, but we're having the non Black people say, we're going to speak up and we need others to speak up, right? And
Mm-hmm.
this is the piece that I think when we start talking about how do you really start to drive a movement, how do you really start to drive breakthrough change? These are the types of things that I believe are going to be critical for that.
Thank you for that. And I want to so there's a part of the that story and the framing that you laid out that is an opportunity. And I think part of that opportunity is um, creating the space for people to see their power,
Yeah,
to be able to take action. And so there's a whole concept called invisible power, right? It's usually associated with people of color and other marginalized groups or underestimated groups. And it's the fact that because of racism and other forms of oppression, we sometimes have it's hidden to us and it's hard for us to see where there are these points of action that we can take in our lives, in public spaces and institutions. And in many cases, even some of the challenges, the reasons why we're experiencing certain challenges. And part of that, I think, framing applies to white people. And we oftentimes don't talk about that, which is there are many times where for white people, it's hidden to them where their power lies too, in being able to be in partnership with people of color. In this case, we're talking about African ancestry people.
right.
And that hidden power, once you unleash it, is an amazing door that opens that you it's really hard to close it once you walk through it.
Yeah,
So thank you for providing a concrete example for people of this is what it looks like in practice to help people unleash that power and open up the door for them to kind of really be able to get closer to themselves and closer to each other. So
absolutely.
the in the on social media, we have people bigging you up for representing Tuskegee University and being so wonderful. We also have a couple of questions that I want to come back to. Um, so number one, there's this the one of the questions really is about the way that we have framed this particular episode of Intentionally Act Live, which is leading with love, circle of action, and acknowledging that it takes a village to be successful. So what more do we need as a village in addition to what we've already talked about in order to be successful, um, especially from other diversity partners? Now, I don't know exactly what is meant by that. So, I mean, you can have the space to kind of interpret it as you will in order to answer the question. We'll get a couple more questions in before we move forward.
Yeah, I think what more? Let me just start with what more do we need from the village? Um, I think we need more people stepping up. I think we need more people going off mute. I think it's very easy to sit in silence, and it's very easy to use the excuse that you don't have the power,
Mm.
right? But power doesn't come from position. We have power where we are, and you can use your power to really start to challenge um, racism.
Mm.
It's just that easy. And sometimes it doesn't mean that you have to have a huge platform. A lot of it starts in our own families,
Mhm.
right? You know, the interesting thing is, as I have conversations with my white colleagues, they share with me how they were socialized. And I'll be honest with you, I sometimes sit in awe that I'm even able to have a conversation with them, recognizing how they're socialized, that they were able to break through that. And so for people to be able, and I don't know if people realize, for you to be able to break out of maybe a racist family and then to have to take a stand sometimes by yourself on anti-racism, that's tough and it's uncomfortable. But that's what we need. We need the village to start at home. Because see, the home, starting at home starts to influence the outside. Inside the walls of P&G, we can create safe spaces, right? Doesn't mean that we're perfect, right? There's still things that we have to do, but unfortunately, Black people don't live in the bubble of being inside the P&G walls all day long. We still have to coexist on the outside, and that's typically where the breakdown, where the hurt, where the violence, where the hate comes. So the village, we need the village to really be bold and be courageous and start really using their circle of influence to help us drive out racism. You're on mute.
Thank you for that. As I muted myself to cough.
Very
Allergies, y'all. Allergies. They're real. So that leads me into the next question that has been posed, because I think people are looking for some of the mechanics a little bit of how do you do this? And so the question really is, how do you provide psychological safety for non-Black people to unmute and speak up?
Absolutely. You know, it really comes with relationships. And that's why I say, I think I can't say that I want white people to do this without, they have to understand our story. So there's something that we also rolled out at Gillette called the 4V model.
Say that one
Uh,
more time.
the 4V model. V is in
For the
Victor.
model. Got
And the first V is versed, verscd, versed, becoming versed. And it's really about educating yourself, right?
it. Mhm.
And I could say very easy, go out and read books, watch videos, but part of education is also hearing my story. This is why I'm on the show today, because I know how important my story is. Your story becomes even more important when you share it with people that you work with every day, right? Because now they're able to connect to a deeper part of who you are and what your life experiences are, and they put a face and a name with it. The second V is called being vocal. So once you really become versed, now you're able to use your voice to really talk about why these things are important and to challenge those who are maybe exhibiting racist behavior. The third V is being visible. So don't just talk about it. People need to visibly see that your behaviors are one that is really driving a culture of anti racism.
Mhm.
And then the final V is vigilance. So really be vigilant, be bold, especially if you're a leader. You don't and leadership again doesn't equate to a position, but really being vigilant in how you are really working to drive and enable that culture of anti-racism. So this whole 4V model really helps give a what I call kind of a guideline to white people on
Mhm.
things they need to do to really get to that point of being a vigilant, bold, courageous champion for Black people. Another big component of that, and I'll go back to the verse, I can't emphasize enough how engaging with people who don't look like you helps you to really get comfortable with understanding and being able to support those people. It makes it personal,
Mm,
right? And it doesn't then become just another black face or black person on the TV. You now have a story. When I look at violence or hatred that black people are experiencing, I can connect it with something very personal
mm,
because of my life experiences. I have little brothers. You know, when I see a young boy being pulled out of a car and beaten or shot, I immediately think about my little brothers, right? And so these are the things that if you don't have that connection that's close to you, it's going to be very hard for you to empathize, for you to understand, and for you to have that passion to want to make a difference. So having people close to you that you can hear those stories, that you can make that connection with, will give you that education, that understanding, that experience, that shared experience through that relationship for you to do different.
mm. So there's two things that are jumping out. One is um, we've up to this point we've talked a lot about what white people need to do to help advance racial equity. And part of the reasoning has been kind of the moral side. And then we know that there's also a kind of a whole other series of reasons why this is important in the workplace as well. Um, there's also a third cat bucket that I'm adding, which is to address the impact of racism on white people. And let me be explicit, y'all, because I'm not talking about reverse racism, right? That's not a real thing. But um, there is this more nuanced conversation around how we as people of color are expected to fit into certain boxes that we often call stereotypes, right? And we're being compared against a bar of normalcy. And those boxes for that bar of normalcy is where white people are expected to be. And there are some boxes that they have to fit in to be in that bar of normalcy. And that gets to your story earlier about how we get socialized, how white people have been socialized. Many white people have been socialized to think and experience things in certain ways. All of that to say, number one, that part of the logic for helping or being part of racial equity, social justice efforts isn't really about saving people of color, right? It's about being a champion and being in partnership with. And also, there are some impacts of racism on how white people are expected to show up in the world. And in order to free yourself, to liberate yourself from the limitations of those boxes, that there's a requirement on our human journey in order to do that work, because it's in our way of really be understanding who we are and in our way of being closer to who we want to be in the world. And it's a whole process that we have to go through. So I wanted to add that as part of the context. And then I wanted to get in a couple more questions that we have in the chat, because there are many, Karen. So the next one is that, one of our intentionallyact.com members, Meg Cater, who is a very active person in our online learning community, she says that we've been discussing the power of and the need to decenter whiteness in DEI work, focusing on the care for uplifting those that need uplifting rather than how white people are doing, feeling, for example. Sounds a lot like what you're saying about allies becoming champions. Does that make sense? And so I want to, so if I understand the question correctly, because there's a lot in there, it sounds like she's asking kind of where I was with the second part of my question earlier, which is what is it that, how do we make sure that people of color, that Black people are getting what they need in these DEI efforts as well? And I apologize, Meg, if I am misconstruing your question. But I just want to make sure that we got your question in there because you took the time to put it in the chat.
Let me make sure I understand. Is the question, how is it that we are making sure that the focus is still on Black people versus making white people feel comfortable through this process?
I would say let's start there because there's a
Okay.
lot that was stated in the question.
Yeah. You know, to be honest with you, this process that we're going through is not going to be comfortable.
Mhm.
And for those individuals who are accepting the challenge of being a champion, they understand that. It doesn't mean that they don't have fears of what they don't know.
Mhm.
And so the role that we as Black people have to play is helping them become versed. Because I think about my job, right? I'm most comfortable in meetings representing and supporting and championing ideas when I have been well prepared on that subject matter. It doesn't change for this topic.
Mhm.
So I think a role that we place, I know some Black people may feel like it's not my responsibility to educate white people. You know, the information is out there. And that's why I say it has to be a combination of people reading the history
Mhm.
and you sharing your personal experience, because the personal experience is what makes it relatable. Excuse me. The personal experience is what makes it relatable, and the personal experience is what touches the heart.
Mhm.
And normally in these types of things, you want to really connect with the heart, because the heart is what's going to drive the passion to be able to take the breakthrough types of actions and create the movement. And if we think back on all of the activity that happened over the past year with a lot of the protests, people's hearts were moved, right?
Mhm.
The hearts were moved to be able to go out there. And these weren't just Black people, there were people of all color, right? And backgrounds. And it's because there was something that resonated with the heart that wouldn't allow them to stay at home and sit on their couch. They had to get out so that their voices could be heard, that their presence. So when I talked about those 4 V's, they got educated because they said they
Mhm.
saw something and they were like, this is not right, right? And then they became vocal. They went out and they vocalized that what they saw wasn't right and something needs to be done better. And then they became visible. They stepped out and they protested. And that's the path that you need when you start talking about vigilant leadership, right? And
Mhm.
if I go back to how do we make sure that Black people are getting their needs met, if we can connect with the champions and make sure that they hear our story, they understand our story, and they can tell our story, then that should translate into our needs being met.
Mhm.
Because here's the difference, Atyia. I can tell my story and I can share my feelings to people who don't look like me, and they'll hear it. But I have to believe if my story is being told to someone from someone who looks like them, they're going to hear it differently. And it may resonate differently that causes them to then become a champion.
Mhm. Thank
Okay.
you for that. Thank you for that. I'll add to briefly add that as Black people and as the larger community of BIPOC, that there's a journey that we have, right, to go on in order to learn this stuff too, because some of the socialization that white people have experienced, we've experienced. And so as we navigate in spaces, the one of the hardest things that I know I've experienced when back in the days when I was in the private sector, in the corporate spaces and nonprofit worlds, and then in government, was while I'm trying to figure out, to use the language that we were using earlier, my place in America, I was also having to figure out how to navigate white people who were in different places in their understanding. And that dance is hard, right? Because you're
Yes.
like, I have to manage myself. I got to figure out what does it mean to interact with other people, and wait, what did that really mean that they just said? Was that about race? Or and so there's this whole calculus that we're constantly doing, that requires us to, if we want to step into that space of discomfort, right, that we have to kind of navigate and figure out. And it's a journey for us that we need support around. And so I want to acknowledge that, in this space, as we are talking about kind of what white people need to navigate that. We're struggling with this stuff too, because there's
Yeah.
like that you've experienced this, right? There's
Oh,
an assumption that because
let
you're
me.
BIPOC, you're in an
I've got to jump in on this one because let me tell you, we have a lot of baggage. I have a lot of baggage, and you think about all of our lives, we've been living under this cloud of racism, and so as you're navigating life, you're taking on a lot of baggage to protect yourself. And
Mhm.
Atia, I spent 4 years in China. I lived in China for 4 years. I hauled all of that baggage with me to China. And I was geared up to continue to protect myself from the beat downs because it's an emotional beat down that you take as a Black person, especially in corporate America. Forget the outside world. Being second guessed, right? Being undermined, being passed over, looked over. Your credentials have to be 3 times as much, right? And the one thing that I realized pretty quickly as while I was there is I didn't need that baggage because China didn't have the history of slavery and just oppressing Black people because that we weren't really in their society like that. And I realized in that moment that I lost a lot of productivity managing all of that stuff. And I had acquired all of this baggage. For the first time in my career, I really knew what it felt like to just go to work and focus my energy on the work.
Mm.
So when I came back differently. I refused to carry all that baggage with me. It doesn't mean that I didn't put up some of those guards, but I'm a different person in terms of what I will accept, what I will take on as a result. Why is that important? Because that means that Black people have a shield up. And so we're protecting ourselves. And so for those who are wanting to support us and champion us, there's some work that has to happen to break those shields down. And that's why the relationships become important. For the Black people, you're going to have to drop some of that baggage to be able to forge those type of relationships such that we can get the help that we need and the support we need from those champions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that. That was beautifully stated. And I know we have a couple more things from on social media. Lots of love and praise for you as is deserved. And there's also I want to spend some time just acknowledging. I earlier I gave a shout out to JD Chesloff and his team over at the Massachusetts Business Roundtable. He just happened to post on Facebook just now, and he says, Karen, thanks for bringing your visible leadership to the roundtable. I have seen what you're talking about today in action, and it's impactful. The organization and I personally are better for it. So, for anyone who doubted Karen's power and her impact in different spaces, you just got a real look into that. And again, I want to say thank you to JD Chesloff for your partnership in working with all ACEs and picking Karen to be the chair of that task force. So that actually is a good transition to talk about that. You ready to talk about that?
Absolutely.
So as we've talked about your personal experience, we've talked about some of the initiatives within P&G, Procter and Gamble, and Gillette. Now, let's talk about some of your other stuff that you have your fingers in, right?
Yeah.
So the Massachusetts Business Roundtable, can you tell us a little bit about your role for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force, and what you're hoping moves forward from that work?
Oh, absolutely. So JD invited me to become a member of the board for the Massachusetts Roundtable. And what I can tell you is that this was very important to me. I only moved to Boston for a little over 4 years ago, and I have been actively recruiting other Black professionals to move to Boston to join our company. And what I believe is important is that you don't just come and be a part of the company. You've got to come and be a part of the community. Hey, I'll tell you something. When I decided that I was going to move to Boston, you wouldn't believe the people. And not even Black people was like, oh my God, you're really moving to Boston, right? Is it okay? You know, most Black people don't want to move to Boston, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I did live in China, right, for 4 years. I think if I lived in China, I can live in Boston. It's going to be okay. And I think there is just a myth that Black people won't move certain places. And what my mission has been is to make not just Gillette a place where Black people can come and thrive and progress, but make Boston a place where Black people want to come and thrive and progress. So the role that I'm playing on this board and the task team is really about, we have this collection of CEOs and executives, and we're really looking at how do we influence policy. The task force that I'm specifically leading with JD as is how do we implement diversity, equity, and inclusion into these policies that we're influencing for the city. And when I can't think of more rewarding work than for us to be able to put our fingerprints and our DNA on policy that's going to make Boston a place for Black people to be able to thrive.
Thank you so much for that. And there's another question that I've kind of held off on because I wanted us to get through some of these other pieces. And so I'm going to go back up to that question. And it was kind of a broad statement. And thank you, Keith Hargrove, for sharing that with us. And it is, has the integration of DEI in corporate America had any positive results? And I think you've started to talk about what your efforts have been, but I think this person is talking about a broader picture. And so I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, I think that we've got a lot of work to do, even within our company. We're just scratching the surface. We've got to have more people in those CEO and C-suite positions. What I can tell you is that it makes a difference when you have a seat at the table.
Mm-hmm.
And until we can get an America that is thinking in a very inclusive mindset, not just about Blacks, but about red people and blue people, then yes, we're going to need to infuse these key executive positions with people that are going to be able to diversify their companies and these key executive roles, such that we can make sure that diversity of thought in corporate America is integrated in an organic way.
Mm-hmm.
Have we made improvements? Yes. Are we there yet completely? Absolutely not. But I do believe we're on the right trajectory. I do believe that the racial unrest that we experienced over the past year helped to start a movement. But with the movement, you've got to make sure that the movement doesn't die. So the role that each individual has to get clear on is what role they're going to play to continue to push that movement forward.
Thank you so much. And the last question, which comes from Michelle Green Stratford. Actually, my apologies, wrong one. She was Michelle Green Stratford was saying, thank you for your realization that in different cultures, you don't need to bring all of your baggage with you, right? And that's something that she's realized as she's traveled around the world. For another episode is the whole conversation around the differences in kind of anti-Blackness internationally versus America and the different dynamics. So that's a topic we'll add to our list to explore another time. And I want to come to Angela Moore. So Angela Moore is asking, how do you help some Black people understand that they need support while trying to keep them from overcompensating for white people? So, and if I understand Angela's question correctly, I think she's asking, there are some of us as Black people who are at the beginning of our journey and don't necessarily understand the full social and historical context of why we see the world looking the way it does today. And in absence of that full context, there's a sense of caretaking for white people and
Yeah.
the things that they do. And so that's how I'm interpreting Angela's question. And so I want to kick it over to you to kind of go
Yeah.
down that rabbit hole as we wrap up.
Well, what I will tell you, it goes back to the 4V model. That 4V model isn't just for white people, it's for Black
Mm,
people. And Black people are on their individual journey as well in terms of their education of our history and where we are and why we are where we are. And I believe you have to meet people where they are, right?
mhm,
And there's some people you're going to be able to provide them with the information and educate them, and you'll hope that they'll have a better understanding. And then
mm,
there are going to be some people that, you can try to educate them. It may resonate, it may not resonate. But the key thing is just understanding that people are where they are and everybody's on a separate journey. We've got to be patient with each other and hope that through education that we can help them understand so that they can be a part of this great task that we have of trying to make this society that we're all exist in a better place.
mm. Thank you so much, Karen. And I'm going to give another shout out to someone else, Thaddeus Miles, who works for the mass housing. Um, and he has put, I'm glad that Karen sees this as a movement and not a moment. And he thanks you for the powerful conversation. So thank you, Thaddeus, for supporting All Aces, for supporting Intentionally Act Live, and being here with us today. So in our last few minutes, I want to transition over to open the door for you to close us out in a way that summarizes or helps people to better understand what you would love to see come out of all of this work you're doing. You're doing work on yourself. You're doing work at P&G. You're doing work outside the organization with folks like Massachusetts Business Roundtable. So, what would you like to see come out of all of this work?
Well, I hope that I can really inspire people to get out of the stands,
Mm,
get on the field. I like sports, so I'm using a sport analogy. It's so easy to sit in the stands and critique what's happening on the field. But Atyia, when you're on the field and you're in the game, that adrenaline just flows, right? The opportunity is either there for you to watch the game, even on the field, or for you to go for the touchdown.
mm,
So my challenge is we can't afford for anyone to be in the stand in the biggest challenge of our life. This isn't just about us. This is so much bigger than us. This is about setting a society, creating a society for generations and generations to benefit from. We
mm,
don't have to look back many years ago and see what happens when you sit in the stand.
mhm,
So, my passion, my push, my challenge is get out of the stands, get on the field, and don't be afraid to go for that touchdown. And what I really want is I want to be able to celebrate in the end zone with all of you.
mm. And on that note, join me all in thanking Karen Dyson for her amazing energy, her spirit, her knowledge, her experience, and sharing it with us, for laying down some concrete examples in the workplace and in real life that helps us to better connect with opportunities for action. And here at intentionallyact.com, that's what we believe in: intentional action, and mixed with some love and hope, right? And so I want to share a quote with you all as we close out based on how Karen just closed us out. It's unknown who originally said the quote. Right now, the closest attribution is to Cicero. So we'll see if that's one day, maybe we'll find out what the truth is. But the quote is: a great person plants a tree knowing that they may never experience the shade of that tree. And that is who Sharon Dyson is. I said Sharon and I meant to say Karen. My apologies. But that's how great a person she is, right? Because she is doing so much amazing work that is about planting trees that she may never experience that shade of, but that we know generations of folks are benefiting from, that we're going to benefit from and have benefited from. So thank you so much for being so amazing, for being here with us on intentionallyact.com. Thank you for all of our viewers. We appreciate you, and we look forward to seeing you on intentionallyact.com. Have a great rest of the day, everyone. And as always, we're sending lots of love, hope, and intentional action to each and every one of you.
Thank you, Atyia.
Thank you.